Hi, hope you guys are doing well. I know that you're super busy in school and your two classes that you're taking right now. I just wanted to review what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks with motivation, getting kids motivated to read, and also with assessment this week. I'm going to really just introduce you to some books that I was thinking would be motivating for students, and then with assessment, talk about some just general points about reading assessment. So this week, an assessment is kind of a precursor to what we're going to be exploring in weeks 4 through 8 in our upcoming project. And for this project, you're going to have a case study student, and you're going to assess that student um, with the various batteries of assessment that I will upload for you. And this will just give you a lot of information about your student so that you could be able to make a plan going forward to support that student. And this is something that you wouldn't necessarily do for every student or most students that you're working with, but it gives you a good idea of the assessments that are out there for teaching reading, and it will help you to have a better ear or sense of the different variables in learning how to read if you're closely assessing a student. So um, these types of assessments are more frequently used by like me as a reading specialist or someone in that same position at your school, but a lot of teachers also might use them just to get some support if they're thinking about how to help a struggling student in their class. So that's the upcoming project, and this week's discussion was kind of a good foreshadowing to that project and working with a student one-on-one. So just a little more notes of that about that project is that you will really need to choose that student soon, and you're going to start meeting with them in the next couple weeks. Okay? So please let me know if you have any questions about that. I'll be putting up a bunch of videos showing you how to do the assessments with links with the paperwork on these assessments. So in talking about assessment and even on this battery of assessments that you're going to be doing, I love what Graves talks about in terms of kid watching. Um, and some of you had noted how many assessments there are and how much we assess kids and how much information we gather on students, which is very true. But I feel like as a teacher that I'm constantly gathering information, whether I write it down or not. But I'm making all of these mental notes in my mind. And a great way to learn about your student isn't just writing all this information down or gathering it, but also just watching what they're doing and do a lot of kid watching. And I'm sure you're going to want to take some notes on your students after you spend some time observing them closely. But that's a really great way to see what your students are doing and how they're thinking on a daily basis. Um, and I love also what Graves says about assessment, and something I believe about assessment is that it can really lead to motivation. I had this one student, Alejandro, that wanted me to DRA him every week. And I was like, Alejandro, I can't DRA you every week. But he would beg me when I walked in the hall to DRA him. And he was a low struggling reader, and he became a proficient reader. And a lot of that was due to his being extrinsically motivated by being assessed and seeing how much progress he made. And so I know we had that talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, and some kids are just really motivated by seeing themselves grow on assessment. And so I think it's really good for assessment, especially in reading, for you to help the kids um, chart their own success as much as possible. So I don't know how many of your schools are using Cafe or the Daily Five, but just the idea of kids on a daily basis finding ways for them to chart their success. I guess I was thinking about Cafe and Daily Five to thinking about our school. We're doing these things called strategy groups where they're a little different than guided reading groups. So guided reading groups would be about moving the kids up to the next level in reading, so getting them from a DRA 14 to a 16 to an 18, moving up text complexity. And then strategy groups are a little different. They would be a little bit like more heterogeneously grouped, so mixed skills group, mixed reading levels, but would be more based on a skill. So teaching a certain phonics pattern or teaching how to read to the end of the words, or how to chunk when you're reading, or how to ask questions when you're reading. So those are strategy groups, and with strategy groups, I find that would be a really great way for kids to track their own growth, for you to make a chart and assess them every week, and for them to shade in a chart on a piece of paper for them to really track their growth. And this is really motivating for students and really helps for you. Studies have just proven that this really helps to grow their reading skills, and so it's something you should try in your classrooms. All right, I have my notes over here. So I love Caldwell's Good Reading Behaviors, and I think you should use something like that in your classroom if you don't use hers. I've used those before in my classroom, but also our school is using the cafe strategies, which are pretty similar. These are cafe strategies are a list of strategies your students can be using to become good readers, but it's basically very similar to good reading behaviors. So using something like this in your classroom is important, so kids have some kind of compass to know how to be a good reader and what does a good reader look like, because some of them don't know what a good reader looks like, and just having that um, list or menu of things really helps to get a sense of what a good reader is. And of course, you would have to teach and give lessons on these different behaviors or these strategies, but it is a really good thing to implement in your classrooms. All right, so a lot of you guys talked about a rubric and using a rubric, and I think rubrics are great, and especially for students. And I think having them create them can be somewhat beneficial, definitely, but also having them kind of be student friendly, so making sure the words are words that they can understand, and if they're in K or first grade, smiley faces, things like that on a rubric to help it be at their level, so they can really kind of be able to read the rubric on their own independently. Um, All right, so I think you have the concept of formative and summative assessment. The idea is the formative is more like the DRA. You use that to form your instruction and kind of guide you, and then summative would be like the CST, so that would be at the end of the year, like a summary of the year. You take the CST, and that's a summative assessment, but it seems like that's pretty clear for most of you in the discussion. And then formal versus informal, there was some things floating around this that weren't quite right. But just so that you know that most of the reading assessment that we're doing is informal assessment, even the DRA and the IRI, which is called the Informal Reading Inventory. These are all informal assessments, and the formal assessments would be something like the CST or the SELT. So, or a GRE is formal. So those are different kinds of formal assessments versus informal. Um, I know a lot of times it makes sense that the DRA would be formal, and then the notes that you take about your students are informal, but really the DRA is still very subjective and an informal assessment. All right. Some of you talked about CBMs, curriculum-based measures, and CBMs are very useful in terms of, especially for RTI, and CBMs are different than running records or DRAs, or any of these other types of assessments. It's another type of assessment. And CBM is like DIBELS would be a CBM. And a CBM is used to be able to track a student's progress over the year in terms of, for example, let's say Jennifer is is kind of falling behind in reading, so her teacher starts some tier 1 intervention in her classroom to give her some additional support. Maybe she notices she can't blend that well, so she's going to start some extra blending with her on a daily basis. So the teacher would track that, her progress for about 6 to 8 weeks using a CBM, which would be just like a passage, like a fluency passage, like DIBELS. And the CBMs are useful because you can start in Tier 1 and use that CBM, the same assessment to track that student every week or two over the whole course of the year. So you actually get to pinpoint which type of intervention works best for her and which type of support. And, pardon me, um, psychologists and RTI team people really like CBMs because it helps us to make decisions about students, and psychologists can use it to see if a kid is growing at the same rate as their peers in their groups, and you would just continue to use a CBM, like the same DIBELS grade 2 level passages throughout a whole year. So if that one girl, Jennifer, isn't making progress in her classroom after 8 weeks, we see that there's no progress on the CBM, which is just a passage that she's reading every week. She's staying at the same word count per minute. Then they say, okay, she needs more help, so let's move her to a phonics intervention in a small group, and it's a pull-out, and then they use that same CBM, so maybe she's making a little bit of growth, so they say, okay, this is better for her to be in this intervention. And then if we see that she's making this much growth and the other kids in her group are making that much growth, a lot more growth, then if there's a question of some kind of IEP that's needed, the psychologist can look at that data to determine whether she's getting these same supports as other kids and really struggling to do well. So that's kind of a small glimpse at CBM. I don't know if that's clear or not, but you can definitely ask me some more questions about that if you're interested. All right, and some of you guys had questions about assessment at Aspire, and this is my 6th year being in the Aspire system. I've been teaching for 5 of those years, and it has changed a lot. I would say 2 or 3 years ago, Aspire got better about being very particular about the norming of the DRA and really using it to track students' growth. Before that, it was super subjective. It's still subjective, but it's less so now. I would say that DIBELS is being used more frequently in schools than it used to be, but it's not used across the board in all Aspire schools. All Aspire schools, of course, use the benchmarks and the CSTs, and they are expected to do the DRA. But I feel like as time is going on, we're starting to decide more which assessments that we like and use them more frequently and use them across the board at all Aspire schools. But it's definitely has changed a lot since I've been here. All right, so let me know if you have any more questions about those things. That was just a quick overview in some notes about reading assessment in the classroom. So I wanted to introduce to you some books. So motivation. There's a ton of gunshots going outside my house right now. I don't know if you hear this, but so motivation, I usually do like to do a read aloud at the beginning of my groups to kind of get my low readers excited about being in reading intervention and kind of focusing on their goals for the year in terms of how we're going to be have a mindset of a reader. So this year we talked a lot about being a ravenous reader, and one of the books that I used was The Bee Tree by Patricia Polacco, which is great, and it talks about reading, being as sweet as honey, and it's a fun book. So I use that at the beginning of my groups to motivate students. So this other book, Junkyard Wonders, one of my faves, Patricia Polacco. I really like this book. Patricia Polacco, I believe, had an IEP. It doesn't explicitly say, but I believe she had a learning disability. And so in this book, she's placed with other kids in the class with learning disabilities, and they feel like they are kind of castaways, like they're from the junkyard. Let me read a couple pages from this because it's great. I don't know if you can, there's the picture. And this is definitely a book from 3rd grade and up. Our class was special, all right. The junkyard kids were pretty amazing to begin with, And Mrs. Peterson showed us how to shine. She even helped us make badges that said the Junkyard Wonders. So you can be proud of who you are, she said. That day when we got the badges, this mean boy came running up to us. Weirdos, retards, now you even wear dumbbell pins. A boy, Barton Poole, grabbed the pin off my shirt. I started to cry, but then Tom and Gibby ran at Barton and his friends. Right, one of his friends said. Now, Twinkletoes and duh, the jerking fool are going to hurt us. We are so scared. Just about then, Jody, big, wonderful Jody, appeared from nowhere. The mean boy sure backed off. Um, Someday you aren't going to have this freak to guard you, Barton snarled as he stalked away. So Jody's just another one of the kids in the special ed class. Okay, so here's the next page. I'm just going to read one or two more pages. There's the whole class. That day, Mrs. Peterson could see that we were badly shaken. Gibby finally spoke up. Mrs. Peterson, he said, we're all junkyard kids, even though you try to make us feel better about it. We're throwaways, junk, and everyone knows it. Oh dear, that's where you are wrong, she said wistfully. Every one of you is my wonder. Don't you realize what a junkyard really is? A place for things that nobody wants, Jody answered. Oh, it is a place full of wondrous possibilities. What some of us see as bent and broken throwaways are actually amazing things waiting to be made into something new, something unexpected, something surprising. We all looked puzzled. All right, class, get your coats. We are walking to the Melvin Beach junkyard right now, she exclaimed. And of course they did. So they go to the junkyard, and they found a bunch of old junk, and they turned them into science projects, and were really engaged, project-based learning. It was exciting. So there's this bunch of them getting excited about what they're building, these science projects. So I'm going to read the end of the book because I skipped a ton of it. But all right, so here's the afterword at the end of the book. Mrs. Peterson has always been with me. That's from the author, Patricia Polacco. All these years. So have all those in my tribe. So they end up calling all the kids in their class their tribe. Tom went on to become the artistic director of the American Ballet Theater Company in New York. Ravain became a textile designer and was eventually invited to Paris to design for the fashion industry. And as for Gibby, well, he went on to become an aeronautical engineer for NASA. He made with the junkyard stuff, he made an airplane. He helped design the lunar models for the Apollo missions. And me? I became a creator of books for children. For all of us, Mrs. Peterson was the wind beneath our wings. She was our alpha of our tribe. She was our compass. I saw Gibby in Houston a few years ago. We spent the afternoon recalling our time together in the junkyard and how Mrs. Peterson helped us believe in ourselves. Then Gibby's eyes misted over. He leaned into me and grinned as he said, remember that photo that day? The photo that my dad took of us all that day on top of the roof after we launched the Wonder? Well, Patricia, I stowed that photo aboard the lunar module on Apollo 11. All of us, Wonders, really did make it to the moon after all. So, you'll have to read the whole book yourself. I skipped probably 9/10 of it. But great book, and I just love books like this to kind of get kids motivated in the beginning of the year, and just to show the struggling readers, to give them someone to connect to, that this writer had a hard time herself when she was in school. Some other books about motivation. A lot of my readers really love this book, and a lot of discussion was on the forum about just this idea of kids being able to connect to the books, and that really brings motivation. And I think my daughter, who's almost 4, really was excited about reading this book tonight. schoolgirl because her cousin is going to school tomorrow. So just just having that special feeling about reading a book makes it really fun for kids. And so this book did that for her. And I know a lot of my students reading at a DRA, like 16, love Amanda Pig books. And they connect with the characters a lot. So they're fun for kids and really motivating books to read. So, um, so some other books, Tacky the Penguin is a great one for teaching care skills. Little Tacky, right here, is a little off, and he saves the day because he's so tacky. And then the hunters leave, and they don't get the penguins because who would want to get a tacky, oddball penguin? So anyways, this is a great book too, and would just be great to as a community building type book in your classroom um, for cares. All right. And so the reason I'm just doing this, I just want you guys to be kind of aware of the books out there and just kind of introduce you in a quick overview to some books. I know you have a ton of books that you're being introduced in your classroom, but I just want you to feel like you have some sense of what's out there in terms of children's literature and what's good and what you can use in your classrooms. So Leo Leone, The Extraordinary Egg. He's a great author, and I like this book. I think this would be a great book to teach schema as a read aloud and schema and background knowledge because they find this egg, they think it's a chicken egg, and the whole entire book they think he's a chicken. That's not a chicken. That's an alligator. But, sorry, my left to right is having issues here. The three frog friends find an egg, and they think it's a chicken egg. And it's not till the very end of the story where they find out, oh, well, that's indeed an alligator, not a chicken egg. Not a chicken. But they were using their schema and their background knowledge about eggs to figure out that, or to decide that this little guy was a chicken. So great book, and I love Leo Leone's just vocabulary that he uses and the structure of his sentences. So it's a great author to introduce into your classrooms, and this book would be great for teaching schema. So those are just an introduction of some of the books that I like, and I'm going to also try to bring in some more chapter books for you upper grade teachers, and I have a lot of my favorites in that area as well. So hope you guys have a great week, and this coming week we are going to be talking about differentiating instruction. All right, talk to you later. Bye.